Download our complimentary guidebooks, checklists, and other useful financial resources at savantwealth.com/guides.
Good to have all of you here. This is an exciting one for me. My name is Joel Cundick. I'm a financial advisor out of Savant's Washington, D.C. metro office. And I've been with the firm for almost 10 years and a predecessor firm for another 7 years before that. So this is going to be a little bit of a distillation of a lot of things that I've learned over that journey. We're going to talk about strategies for confident and impactful spending in retirement today. And it's going to be a little bit different probably than what you hear from many financial advisors, intentionally so. It's drawn from a number of conversations that I've had over the past few years, really. Lots of questions I've gotten. And I thought it would be helpful to collate that into one place. So this is going to be fun. We'll go through it together. You're welcome to post questions, the Q&A. I'll answer some of them at the end as I have time. If we run out of time, that's okay. Still post the questions to the Q&A because someone will get back to you with answers to your questions. That's one thing that we really think is critical, is getting people answers when they have specific questions about their case. All right, so we're going to launch off here into strategies for confident and impactful spending. All right, so like I said, this is maybe a surprising topic. Many advisors are going to really look to you to keep saving in retirement, in essence. This is one of the places where there can be an implicit, usually not explicit, conflict of interest between an advisor and a client. Because the more that you have saved, the more that an advisor gets to manage, right? If you are thinking, hey, I'd like to have my mortgage paid off in retirement, there's going to be a conflict of interest there. Now, what's the way that an advisor does best to mitigate that? It is to make sure that they are disclosing all choices to you. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? I can explain to somebody who's thinking about paying off a mortgage, here's the benefits, the potential drawbacks of doing that. Keeping the mortgage, here's the benefits and drawbacks of doing that. And really getting you the information you need to make a good decision. And like I said, that's going to be a lot what we cover today. People who tend to search out advice tend to be savers more than average. At least that's been my experience. And so I think a lot of you are on here, the call today, are realizing, hey, I've saved a lot over the course of my career. This big decision to turn that into a spending path is actually somewhat intimidating. And that's okay. Let's acknowledge that. There is a lot of trepidation about a transition to retirement. One of the biggest questions I get is, hey, where's my money going to come from? How am I going to replace my paycheck? And I get that question from people you would never think that you'd get that question from, right? Who have an amount far larger than you think anyone would need to worry about where's the check going to come from. It's still a concern. The reason for that is that, one of my favorite commentators on the financial planning industry talks about how personal financial planning is much more personal than it is financial. And this today, the topic we're covering today, is definitely one of those ways that we're going to be discussing things that really hit emotionally and it's not about numbers at the end of the day. I'm going to talk to you about some ways that numbers can help. But at the end of the day, one of the things we'll talk about is this idea of enough. And what I have learned in my many years of being a financial advisor is if you don't feel like you have enough, more money is not going to solve that problem. You think it will, right? I have friends I know who have retired 2 and 3 times. Sometimes because they decided they, had not properly handled it. Sometimes because of interest, because they just wanted to keep working, which is fine. That's not something that we should feel bad about. But some of them because they didn't feel like they had enough, and they have this general anxiety that they need to keep saving. So we're going to talk about evaluating where you are right now. This is not a topic that is going to be for everyone. Then we're going to cover how to get comfortable with this idea of retirement, talking about enough. We're going to talk about the layers of conservative assumptions involved in telling yourself, I just have barely enough. That I think is going to be quite fascinating. At least, this is one of the benefits to me. It's not the first time I've seen this movie. And so I've learned a number of things from those experiences that hopefully we can cover today. And lastly, what's critical at Savant is the idea of building an ideal future. And I think some of the most important things we'll talk about how to spend will be in that section at the end. Right. So evaluating where you are. There's a whole band of people pre-retirement, post-retirement, who don't really know where they're at. And there are definitively people who have not saved enough for retirement. The answer in those situations could be that they need to work more years than they thought they would. They may need to downsize their home. They may need to figure out ways to spend less than they have been spending in their working years. I'm not intending to discount that and say that's not real. And this is not a Pollyanna presentation. If that is the case, sitting across the table from someone who can objectively analyze that can be helpful to get you that information to help then plan around, well, what can we do? Then we have the people who do have enough. Let's say you're sitting across the table from a financial advisor 2 years before retirement. We look at things and say, yeah, 2 more years of work, that's going to put you right in the proper band where you're going to have an appropriate amount to be able to draw from in your retirement years. Okay. And then we have a class of people, I call them my highly successful savers, who tend to have more than they are spending. This can happen when I meet 2 to 3 years in advance of retirement with someone to look at their situation. We could say, wow, you could stop working right now. So when we get in that situation, one thing I notice is that people don't tend to believe they're in that situation, right? It takes a lot of discussion and then talking about the underlying questions and assumptions that can feel awkward to get somebody to that level. One of the resources I'm going to quote today in the presentation from is this book, Die with Zero, which was not written by a financial advisor, but I read it in the last year and I found it to be very helpful in changing paradigms and getting people to think differently. I will draw from a number of the concepts in that book and I'll post it at the end so you can see, if you think that might be helpful. One of the questions the author of the book posits is, when is the party? And that's a question I ask oftentimes. When is the party? We did all this work for saving all this money. And oftentimes, inadvertently maybe, and implicitly, not directly, what ends up being the major goal of retirement is inheritance. Because an individual or couple are looking at their situation and decide they need to underspend. The decision to underspend is in essence deciding to put top priority to an inheritance goal. Inheritance goals are fine, they're good. The reality is, for most good financial planning, we need to plan for an inheritance. The reality is we don't know which 30-year investment time horizon a retiree is going to be heading into. And so we need to keep the spend low enough so that we do have latitude to absorb under average years of return, right? Especially when we look at the first couple of years of retirement are really important on that path. So there's some stress tests we can do to a portfolio to check that. But what I really don't want to have is a situation where someone hits their 80s or someone reaches their death and the kids look at the money and people say, wow, why didn't someone spend some of this earlier? This was clearly something that they worked hard for. I will tell you a little story of a friend of mine that really was maybe the seed of me thinking about this topic so much. I was having lunch with her. She was 81 years old at the time. And we were talking about things that she thought she'd do. And she got this gleam in her eye. And she said, one of the things I will never forget, I was in my 20s traveling Europe on a shoestring with my sister and a group of other friends. And we were in Paris. We're standing across the street from the Ritz, Paris. And I leaned over to my sister and I said, someday we're going to stay in that hotel. And I said, oh my goodness, look at this. You have plenty. You can go stay in that hotel. And she said, no, I don't really feel like doing it at this point. And she was okay with it. And that's good. And I'm glad she was okay with it. But inside me, alarm bells went off to say, I don't want anyone to get to that point where a major life thing they wanted to do was something that eventually they decided, I can't do it, or I'm not interested in doing it, really because the opportunity passed by. The way that we make sure that that does not happen is that we get the experiences in early on. And it can seem at times, well, isn't that the time when I need to be the most cautious? We'll cover that. We'll talk about, hey, when is the party and is it appropriate for you to consider that you're there? So gaining comfort with retirement. I talked earlier about, extra years of working are not necessarily going to make you feel like you have enough. If you have that aching sense that you don't have enough, you think you'll solve it with just working a few more years. But you get to the end of the few years and you're oftentimes still going to feel that sense of, I don't have enough. And largely that comes from the idea that money is not the generator of that kind of peace and comfort emotion of having enough. Sometimes information is the path. Sometimes talking through fears and anxieties and coming up with solutions for them is. But that is some of the most deep work that we as financial advisors do in the profession. And that's one of the major reasons I'm glad to stay and be in this profession as it continues to grow and evolve. It's so important. So you do need information framed properly. But one of the things you'll learn, one of the reasons extra years of saving is not going to really do it, is that the heavy lifting of saving for retirement is done early on. By the time I'm sitting across the table from someone at age 60, a lot of the heavy lifting has been done. Additional years of work are largely going to help someone have a little bit more, yes, but less years of spending. That's going to be the number one driver. Delaying drawing from the portfolio. So you may think, hey, I need to hypercharge my saving. Check that assumption. It may be true, it may not be true, but it is important to get some data. Extra savings from 60 to 65 are going to have the lowest impact on the success of retirement versus any other 5 years of saving that you've done, because there's no time for those savings to really accumulate and grow, right, in early retirement at least. One of the things we learn to do to amass wealth, right, to accumulate wealth, is that we defer gratification. We keep saving high and spending low. If you hypercharge that, there's this FIRE movement, right? Financially independent, retire early. People who are saving 60, 70% of their income. The difficulty that people are finding with that, as the FIRE movement has evolved, and it's been around for over a decade now, many are going back to work. And the reason they're going back to work isn't because they hadn't saved enough for the expense level that they planned on. It's that the expense level they planned on was not enough. They're realizing after 10 years, they're just holding back, and realizing it will never change, right? But when you develop a pattern of high saving, low spending, sometimes that starts in your teenage years. Sometimes it starts even before that. It can really be something that is strongly ingrained in you. And that's a good thing. It's what gets you to the point that you have a lot of wealth. The difficult thing is that when you retire, that impulse can become problematic because it's difficult to turn off the dopamine hit that you get from saving. I have friends who stopped working and are still saving. Think about that. Stop working, still saving. How is that possible? Well, because maybe they take a withdrawal from their portfolio to spend, but a portion of that withdrawal goes into a savings account. Why? Because there is that hit of good feeling from continuing to save. All right? Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. Oftentimes in retirement, it can be difficult. So how do you know, though, if you have enough? I will say that this is one of the most important things of data, right, of the financial advice side of things. And I will also say that online calculators don't tend to do a very good job about this. And I will tell you some of the reasons for that in a bit. But you'll see here a sample screen of what an advisor might go through in terms of a retirement projection with you. And you see these probabilities of success. It derives from Monte Carlo simulation, which is a software that's been around for over 30 years that was applied to the financial planning industry to really try and get better at randomizing investment return. Because prior to that, the financial planning industry was really using just a static rate of return all the way through retirement. You're going to earn 7% every year. The one thing that we knew heading into retirement was that the plan was wrong. And that's unsettling, right? There might be no year of retirement in which you get a 7% return. But the plan says every year, 7% all the way through. So Monte Carlo simulation decides instead to randomize investment return. The returns in the high single digits, low double digits, those are a lot more likely than the returns in the negatives or the returns above 20%. And so it generates those returns in equality with their probability based on historical data. All right. And we are always going to have limitations. I'll just put in the thumbnail right here that there is no way of being 100% certain that the future is going to be just like the past. However, to plan for anything else, what we realize is that there's not really an investment portfolio that we can build that will take advantage of that and harness that, right? So are we going to build an investment portfolio to plan for the majority of circumstances or for the small minority of circumstances that's going to limit our ability to do many of the other things we might like to do? Topic for another day to go farther in depth, but I did want to put a thumbnail to that. You'll see that the calculator goes all the way up to 99% probability of success. What does that mean? It randomizes 1,000 scenarios and says what percentage of those does the person end up with money left over at the end of the plan, right? And what we find, research that has been done on Monte Carlo simulation is that the worst 5% of Monte Carlo simulations are worse outcomes than the 30 years, any of the 30-year time periods that include the Great Depression, okay? And this is because when you truly randomize 1,000 scenarios, you're going to end up with a series of years or maybe 5 negative years in a row. There is a self-correcting mechanism to markets typically, right? A large down is typically followed by a large up. I'm not saying whether it's going to be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, but there's going to be peaks and valleys, and there is some sequencing. And when you truly randomize investment return, you're going to come up with some just off-the-wall outcomes, right? So we're not looking to have 99. This is not, you don't want to get an A on this test. We want to be 75, 90%, depending on the advisor you're sitting with. I mean, that is the range that generally the industry accepts as a decent range. We don't want to oversave to protect for cases of, highly unlikely scenarios, and we don't want to have less than we need, right, to only handle like 60 or 70% of the results, because we could retire in a time frame that is not that great on investment return, right? But one of the keys here is look at the layers of conservativeness that you are adding into the plan. And this is one of the things that it's critical to talk about. Let me go here to the layers of conservative assumptions. All right. Let me tell you some of the things that we build into a financial projection that you need to keep in mind. Number one, typically a financial advisor is never going to rely on the home, one of the biggest assets in the portfolio, as a source of income in retirement. So already you have a significant backstop to the plan, because in actuality, you could sell a home and spend money from that. And in the majority of cases, for example, of a long-term care scenario, that is the backstop that helps cover a long-term care scenario. There are other scenarios that you can talk with an advisor beyond the scope of this presentation, but I would say that a major dementia event in your early 70s, very different from the need for care and help in your late 80s, early 90s, right? And so one of the things we really kind of implicitly build into the plan is this assumption that the home equity is never going to be relied upon. And so the percent probability of success is artificially low because we're not including all of the assets, okay? Another layer of conservativeness that's built into a lot of plans that it would be really good for an advisor to keep in mind. It's that basic retirement planning software. So if you go online and look at, an online calculator, do I have enough for retirement? You're going to plug in a number for spend. It's going to take that number, it's going to increase it by inflation all the way through retirement, and it's never going to deviate. It's just going to say expenses will rise every year with inflation. I've seen spending patterns for 15, 20 years and know that that is not how retirees spend, typically. First of all, I've yet to hear of a retiree reaching out annually and saying, can I have a 3% raise because of inflation? Typically doesn't happen. It tends to be more stair-stepped, right? Go a series of years at a flat withdrawal rate, kind of think, oh, I'm not really having enough, raise the withdrawal rate by a larger than 3%, but kick it that the same level for years and kind of spending what you get. Okay, so that's number one, but that's not the most important one. The most important one is that some point in your late 70s, early 80s, it's different for everyone. But you're going to say, I don't want as much. If you're like the majority of people. Why is that? It's okay. I mean, some of you have seen this with your parents, right? Where instead of going to visit the grandkids, they say, the grandkids can come to us. Instead of lining up the next river cruise in, Central Europe, they say, yeah, I think we're going to stay home this year. In terms of volume of eating, they're not going to go out to eat every night. They're going to eat a whole lot less. The list can go on and on. However, what the reality is there that most plans, basic plans, do not factor in is that you're going to spend less in your 80s than your 60s. So why would we delay spend through our 60s and 70s in favor of an 80-year-old who's going to look back and say, why did you do that? I don't feel like spending, right? This is very true when somebody is trying to accelerate paying down a mortgage in early retirement because the experts all say I should have no mortgage in retirement. If I'm going to take my late 60s and early 70s spending extra to pay off a mortgage that the bank would be perfectly fine with receiving monthly payments for the next 20, 30 years, right? They require nothing more than the agreed upon payment. And those future dollars are going to cost a lot less than today's dollars, right? Because the monthly payment never rises. Property taxes do, but you're going to pay property taxes anyway. The mortgage doesn't rise. So we make the minimum payment all the way along. We free up money to be able to spend on other things. Again, I'm looking at what layers of conservativeness we've built in here and question your assumptions. So you do tend to spend in retirement at least what you were spending in your working years. I know that the math out there says, oh no, the people drop their spend to 80 or 75% of what they spent in their working years. I think that comes from a different time period, right? I think largely people, when they're retiring, are looking in essence for a check to continue into their bank account that kind of matches what they were getting before, maybe a little bit more. And the reason it would be a little bit more is because you got 40, 50 hours more of the week to do something with. And I hope that you're doing productive things that you enjoy, right? Not sitting and watching CNBC all day. Please don't do that, right? So that's one thing to be careful about. How much am I actually going to spend? Be realistic about that. I said already, you don't need to pay off your mortgage to retire. I said already, your spending will not stay constant at retirement, and we need to be careful about overestimating long-term care costs. We need to factor in, let's be realistic. Let's think about, hey, how many years of long-term care do I want to plan on needing? And how much does that care currently cost? And let's quantify it. Because I've seen situations where somebody wants to save $3 million to put in reserve for long-term care. And when we look at things, in all realistic probability, $1 million is the number for that person. I don't know what it is for you. We'd have to talk about your health history, your family, all things like that, and what part of the country you live in. However, what we don't want to do is think of a goal in the abstract bajillion dollars, right? We want to put concrete terms to art. What is that I'm wanting to save for? And do I really need to save for it? Or can I use home equity as that source? Fascinating study here. This is really just to kind of say I know what I'm talking about, all right? This is I maybe a surprise to you. It wasn't a surprise to me. But the Employee Benefits Research Institute did a study, and they looked at people 17 to 18 years into retirement. And a majority of those people have at least 80% of what they had saved for retirement at the year that they retired. And a third of them, over a third, have actually more in their investment accounts than they had when they retired. And some people say, well, that's probably important, probably a good thing. And I would say no. 18 years into retirement, the average person is probably in their early 80s, and they are not needing that money. Certainly not to the level that they needed it earlier on in retirement. So that is actually a problem if you are going to think about it at the maximum enjoyment of a financial life. All right. Let's dive deeper into this reasoning that there is definitely this dopamine high that you get from not spending, right? From being frugal, from spending $600 on an airplane flight instead of $1,200, right? Because you found a deal. There's something really good about that. It led to you having a lot of money. And there's something that can be corrosive about that when you save so much money that it's really not a problem for you to pay more to have a very comfortable seat on a flight to Europe, because when you get there, you're going to be jet lagged. And it would really be nice to hit the ground at least on a decent night's sleep because you were able to stretch out. Now, many people can't afford that. And I'm not saying that's a problem. Some people will put a value judgment on, should somebody be paying for business class, first class, economy plus, right? But what I am saying is that there are situations where you've saved enough money that, goodness gracious, you can afford to do it. And probably your trip will be made somewhat better because of it. And it's important to at least consider. In no way am I asking you to get to the point of discomfort. But I am asking you to maybe stretch your idea of what comfortable means in certain situations, okay? So people feel they can't spend. They need to have enough for future medical costs, right? There's a big concern. Well, what about what I'm going to spend on medical? If you have a Medicare plan and a Medicare supplement plan paired up together, you're going to spend very little for medical care in retirement. You're going to pay premiums. You're not going to pay much for medical care. What you're going to pay for is things like rehab, the unskilled, the non-doctor provided assistance in retirement. And we got to, again, quantify what that is. Because Medicare is going to give you about 100 days, and that's it. After that, you're on your own. So do we need to set some aside for medical? Yes. Do we need to set aside money to cover a massive heart attack in our 80s? That's going to be Medicare. It's going to cover that. All right. A major cancer diagnosis, in the large majority of circumstances, Medicare is going to cover that. So maybe not. They need to make sure their children inherit funds. This is something that they feel very much an obligation to the next generation to make sure that they have. Keep in mind that when children inherit funds, generally they're going to be in their late 50s to early 60s, and their path for retirement is largely going to have been determined by their work, what they've done. So this can be something that maybe you're thinking you really want to make sure your kids inherit something, and your kids are thinking, I'm good. I hope that mom and dad are spending exactly how they want to spend because they should be living the life they want to live. They don't know what surprises may come in retirement. Absolutely. This is, again, why we want to quantify. Go ahead, put aside some funds for emergencies. Go ahead, if you feel comfortable having a couple of $100,000 in a bank account. That's okay. We can quantify around that, but let's not say, let's not hyper generalize problems and think it could be millions of dollars of expenses, and so I can't spend anything. All right. What if markets drop substantially? Totally rational thing to think about. And this is where, yes, the information that you're provided from looking at a retirement projection and really understanding what it means, like what does a percent probability of success mean in terms of the realities of how I spend through retirement? That's important. They only feel comfortable if they have X amount in cash. And I can tell you, I've heard all numbers. I've heard people say, I need to have at least $50,000 in the bank. I've heard people say, I need to have at least $1 million in the bank. It's a different amount for many different people, but they have this sense of I need to have a certain amount in cash. What I tend to tell people is look at that amount that you feel like you need to have in cash and look at how much you spend per year. And how many years of expenses have you put into cash? And we talk about layers of conservativeness. You've built probably an investment portfolio with defensive investments, bonds. Savant uses a number of alternative investments that we really think are impactful. But these are the defensive side of the portfolio. Well, guess what? Those defensive investments are built in there to handle the years where markets are down, right? If we put 30% of defensive investments in a portfolio and your spend is 4 or 5% of the portfolio, you've got 5 or 6 or 7 years of defensive investments that you could spend on for all that time and just let stocks do what they do. So if we're going to have an amount in cash and we're going to have a defensive allocation in the portfolio, that is belt and suspenders, right? So we should at least be mindful of that. And then this sentiment that they still feel like they need to save. I talked about that a little earlier, which is a very fascinating thing. I'm retired, but I need to save for the future. You're at the future, okay? So let's talk about building that ideal future. Lots of twists and turns on the road. This is one of my favorite slides because when I sit down with a 40-year-old and we do a retirement projection, I always make sure they know, I say this off with a 65-year-old, the one thing we know about this plan is that it's wrong. And it's probably wrong within 1 year of creating it. Why? Because there are twists and turns that happen to life, complete surprises that you need to reevaluate. So how do we properly plan for that? In terms of retirement, in terms of the conversation of this call, I'm really thinking of it as how do you build out what you want your ideal future to look like? And in order to do that, I like walking people through an exercise of mapping out an ideal day, an ideal month, an ideal year. An ideal day, the concept is if there were nothing else on my calendar for a day, how would I ideally spend a day? What time would I wake up? What time would I go to bed? What would be the activities I do during the day? Adding in a month adds in some kind of variability. Maybe I'm not going to go fishing every day, but I'd like to go fishing 3 times a month. I like to golf. I like to knit. I'd like to go to a convention for Star Trek fans, right? I don't know what it is, but map out the things that you would just say, ideally, I'd like to do this. A year captures seasonality. It says, well, maybe I'd like to spend a month somewhere cooler in the summer months, or spend a month somewhere warmer in the winter months. We capture that kind of thing in doing that kind of exercise. Another thing that this is non-financial, I will tell you, stimulate your brain. Do things that teach you. Learn a musical instrument. Learn a language. Learn about a place that you're going to travel to. Don't just make it a trip. Make it something that you learn about it in advance. Many states have available to retirees the ability to audit classes at the state universities for free. You can go to college classes. You don't have to pay any money. And you can attend and learn, right, in that kind of setting and stimulate your brain. These things are very valuable in retirement. What are some other things? Well, how about gifting to children while you're still living? How about not waiting until you're dead for kids to get assets? And I'm not saying that they get everything now, but I'm saying, what would it be like maybe if you have enough assets and you could help a child with a down payment on a home, or with a down payment on a car, right? Or whatever it is. I'm not telling you exactly what it is. What if you have, grandchildren that are in the beginning stages of saving for their retirement someday? They're in their career. They have a Roth IRA available to them, but they're not using it because they barely have enough money. The value of $1,000 to that 20-year-old and the value of $1,000 to a retiree tends to be very different. If you could take $1,000 and put that into a Roth IRA, start hypercharging their future retirement, that can have amplification effects, right? Always, they need to have some earned income. You can put in there up to their level of earned income. You could be saving $7,000 a year for your grandchildren's retirement and have a huge impact on them in the future someday. Again, we're talking about situations where you have oversaved and where are you going to spend that money. So we first have figured out that you're in a position where there is more here than you're ever going to need in your lifetime. That's an important quality. You can gift to meaningful charities. A lot of times we put gifts to charities in at death only, but we can gift to charities over our lifetime. When we turn 73, we can give up to $100,000 per year to the charities of our choice via a qualified charitable distribution. Actually, you can start at 70 and a half still, but when you turn 73, that can go towards your required distribution. So maybe you don't have to take a required distribution and subject it to taxes. You could give some or all of it to a charity and never pay tax on it at all, and the charity doesn't pay either. And now you got the benefit of researching a charity and the work that it does, and feeling the good that can come from giving, right? Also very valuable. Let's think about some things on experiencing life differently, okay? And this is, man, one of the really transformational things about this Die with Zero book. When you go on big vacations earlier, you have more time to enjoy the memories of those big vacations. And I'm here to tell you that makes a huge difference. If you have not done this yet, thinking about a friend who took the whole family to Disney World last year, the whole family. And they saw the light in their grandchildren's eyes as they had this experience. And they built bonds as family together. And they made memories that everyone is going to enjoy for years to come. They won't forget. Taking a child on a special trip together, or a grandchild, right? Taking a grandchild to their favorite place. They have a bucket list of places they'd like to visit. And you say, hey, let's go there. Spending money on experiences has an amplifying effect. It's not financial, but it is hugely valuable in life. So just as something to consider. Another one, don't stop working out of guilt. So don't feel like you have to stop working. If you are enjoying working, if you love what you do, keep working. Don't do it for the financial reasons. And make sure you're doing it not because of what I say at the end, or keep working out of fear. We don't want to be at a place where we're saying, I have to work or else. But if we're a place where we have ample money and we say to ourselves, yeah, but this is what I love to do. This is what I would do if I could choose anything to do in a day. Part of my ideal day is to do this. Well, then what we often say, I have a colleague, Rob Morrison, who wrote a book. I'll put the resource at the end of this as well. Victory Lap Retirement. Keep doing the things that you love doing professionally for a period of years, and stop doing all the junk, the stuff that you didn't enjoy doing. Boil it down to your favorite stuff and keep doing it. Again, you're doing that because you've decided ideally this is meaningful to you. And I have friends who have done really cool things with that, who have funded a grandchildren's education trust, right? To take care of all the education needs for the future generation. They're doing it because they're like, well, I have enough money. I don't feel like stopping working. I don't really need any of the money from this, but look at the cool things I can do, right? Or they decide, I'm going to take 50 or 70 or 100% of the money I'm earning, and I'm going to give it to a charity. I figure that I can help that charity far more with the dollar amount I'm earning from this job than I could if I only devoted 10 hours a week to assisting that charity after retiring. Hugely fine, valuable. This is okay. This is, again, I'm trying to talk about how it's not about the money, right? It's about the life and the experience and designing it the way you want it. Spend money on things that save time. Okay. Pay for someone to clean your house. Pay for someone to mow your lawn. Pay a neighborhood teenager. Let them start a business, start a job, feel the value of earning. All right? But when you have more than you need, and you are still doing things that you think, oh, I got to do that again, pay someone to take care of your bills every month. Just have a bookkeeper. Take care of all the bills. I don't want to think about that anymore. Right? These are things that can be amplifying to your time because you free up time to do other things that you would enjoy doing. There can be a sense of guilt. But again, that's why I'm talking about quantify it first. Figure out if you've got far more than you needed to live on a retirement. These are things that we can do that are going to make difference to the experience we have in retirement. We got to maximize the years we've got, right? There's only so many years that we're going to be able to enjoy this. And it tends to be that the best year to enjoy is the present, right? That whatever the present year is tends to be the best year, right? Spend money on hiring somebody to help you get more physically fit. You feel tired all the time. There's nothing really wrong with you, but you just know that if you started a fitness program, things would go better. And you go to the gym once a month and you think, oh, I should really do this. But you know that if you were accountable to someone, it would make a difference and you would start exercising multiple times a week and you would feel better. Well, you talk about a great investment. You just put money into making every day of the rest of your life feel better. So go ahead and spend money on things like that. Spend money on things that make the experience better. If you are going to, this is classic example. I went last year, 2 years ago with my son to Rome. And I had lived in Rome as like a late teenager. And I visited the Colosseum. But this time I paid money to have a tour guide take us around the Coliseum and around the Forum. And it was amazing how different the experience was. Rather than wandering around and looking at cool old stuff, I was getting stories and learning and feeling different about the experience. It made the experience much better. Okay, other things that you could do. That was really the majority of what I wanted to cover here, right? I mean, there's going to be specifics to your case that it really only be able to figure out sitting down and talking with someone about your situation. But the bottom line that I hope you take from today's presentation is that it's important to figure out how much you have and put that in context with how much you envision spending. And there could be someone on this call who has $500,000 and has far more than they need because they have a large pension coming to them and a social security check coming to them, and that's really all they're planning on spending in retirement. They don't really have any intentions with that $500,000 saved. You could be in a situation there where you have far more than you need. Now, am I saying that that's going to mean that you're going to go out tomorrow and take a National Geographic tour around the world? No. But I am saying let's start thinking and expanding the potential possibility of the range of things that we can accomplish in retirement. Okay? I said I'd give you some resources. Victory Lap Retirement, I referred to during the presentation. Rob Morrison of Savant Wealth Management was one of the authors of that book. Great book about working on your own terms, right, in your final years of working. Die with Zero. Look, I told you, Bill Perkins, not a financial advisor, and I'm not going to tell you I agree with 100% of the stuff in there. But if you want a paradigm-shifting book that is going to help you think differently about your money in retirement, I highly recommend it. And the psychology of money, really anything written by Morgan Housel I love. I devour his writings. I listen to his podcast. But the thing I love most about Morgan Housel and this book is that he frames things differently. He gives you great data to understand why your brain's doing what it's doing about money, all right? And believe me, we do a whole lot of things about money that have nothing to do with math, right? Money is a topic that is highly integrated with our emotions. And it's important to understand some of the psychology behind it. So that's a great book, all right? And I really say here at the end, if you think it could be helpful to sit down for 15 minutes with someone and talk about your situation, please schedule a 15-minute introductory call. Let's talk about what life looks like for you and where this could be relevant to you, okay? We're gonna have time for questions now. Let's see, I've got to look at here. Questions that were posted. All right, we have a number of them. All right, how do I know whether I have enough? Yeah, I mean, I think this is really good question, right? I know that there's a wide range of people on this call, and I haven't been speaking to everyone. Everyone's in different situations. So it's really important to look at your personal situation and quantify, right? This is one of the hugely valuable things about getting on paper a retirement projection that looks at data and numbers, quantifies how many years you might live, quantifies how much things might cost in the future, expands the cost of healthcare at double the rate of average inflation because that's how healthcare costs do it. It gets more into the nuance, calculates how much taxes are going to be paid every year in retirement. So I can't speak to where you are in the spectrum, but sitting down with somebody can definitely get you that answer. Okay. All right. Okay. We covered this a bit, but I want to make sure to talk about it a little deeper. What happens if markets collapse? Okay. What happens if markets collapse? All right. Well, the thing that I would first say is, what do you mean by collapse? All right. Because markets are going to drop. A bear market is going to happen on average every 6 or 7 years. Okay. And every year, the market on average is going to have some peak and some valley of about 14% drop. That's the average, right? So last week, everybody started, running around like chickens because of the market's dropping about 4 or 5% in a few days. And what I would just say is, let's put that all in context. Markets rise 53% of the days. Markets fall about 47% of the days. If we expand the window and look at longer ranges of time frame, we got to over to 80% of years of 5-year time periods are positive, and more like 90% or higher of 10-year time periods. And so really we're harnessing risk in markets. That's what we're doing. Like that's one of the reasons I talk about having a defensive side of your portfolio in early retirement, especially because we want to have that moat that you wouldn't need to draw from stocks for a period of years. You've got defensive investments. But again, this is kind of like some financial advisors think of it as like a bucket strategy. This money's saved for the next 5 years. This money's saved for the next 20 years. This money's saved for 30 years from now. That can be helpful. But I think the underlying question is, I think you're asking, what if markets collapse and never come back, right? And I'm not going to say that that's a 0% probability. I get it, right? That there is a non-zero probability of that occurring. The issue is, how are we going to plan for that? What retirement projection are we going to build that if truly everything collapses and never comes back, that you're going to be okay anyway financially, right? We're talking about a circumstance in which I'm not even sure you can get access electronically to the funds that you've got in a bank or in a retirement plan. So that's probably as far as I'll go into it today. I'm sure if you sit down across from a financial advisor, you can go into more depth, more data, but I think that's a good thing to think about. All right, and what are the best assets to give to charity? Okay. Oh, that's a good point. So I was saying give qualified charitable distributions. What we want to do is we want to, if possible, right, if our tax rate is reasonable enough, we actually want to spend from our IRA in life. We want to give from our IRA to charity in life. That asset, when we leave that to our kids someday, is going to be subject to income taxes to them, just like it was to us. Roth IRA is very different. Roth IRA is the best asset to leave to kids. But really, actually, taxable brokerage accounts are just about as good, because a taxable brokerage account kind of turns into a Roth IRA the day that you die, because all of the embedded gain in the taxable account gets washed away. Your kids inherit with the cost basis at your date of death. That's called a step up in cost basis. And if that sounds like head scratching to you, I would definitely recommend sitting down and talking to someone. Okay. But to give to charity, definitely IRA assets better to give to charity. Gifting to family, we're looking at taxable accounts, right, instead to do that. All right. Okay, I'm seeing, yeah, that's all the time we have today. I'm sorry I couldn't get to more. Really, if your question was posted, it's going to be answered. But I would highly encourage you to take some time to sit down and talk with us. We'd love to chat about your situation and anything that we can do to help you. So thank you for your time today, and I hope that's been helpful.
If you enjoyed this webinar, visit savantwealth.com/guides and download our complimentary guidebooks, checklists, and other useful financial resources.